one of the things Justin talked about yesterday was founder sort of mental health and other issues that they might face. And I thought Randy might want to share sort of two things. One, as time before Kleiner Perkins as a virtual CEO. So I found that quite interesting because we don't really have that concept in New Zealand where you have a virtual CEO sitting with a founder. So I think just sort of talking about that model. And then I think the other piece would be quite interesting from an investor perspective. What are you looking for in terms of a founder, a CEO, and maybe a few reflections on the discussion yesterday with Justin as well?
Yeah, so the virtual CEO job, which is one I kind of created for myself, and I'll tell you how and why in a moment, came out of frustration. I have a checkered past. So I was a rock promoter. I helped run a community development program for a relatively large city in the northeast of the United States. I taught economics at a cooking school. I was a lawyer, trial lawyer, and then later a technology lawyer. I was a founder of a couple of companies, a CEO. I ran LucasArts Entertainment for George Lucas, and I ran another entertainment company called Crystal Dynamics for Kleiner Perkins before I ever was a partner there. I had been groomed to be a scaled CEO. Right, and my mentors and the people that I worked with were constantly promoting me upwards to run bigger and better things. And I had a crisis in the mid-90s where I was a CEO on my way up and felt pretty unhappy. So I was extremely successful. I was financially successful. I was achieving the goals that I thought were my goals, but were certainly being set out for me and meeting other people's expectations around those. And the more successful I was, the more unhappy I felt. And so I dropped out. I basically parachuted out of a perfectly good plane, left my company with no place to go, mid-career, and then to try to figure out what did I really want to do. And I realized that what I really liked to do was work with talent and to innovate at the most creative edge of business. I say business because if I was a good sax player, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be Clint, right? Or if I was, you'd be giving me tips. If I was a great artist, I wouldn't be here today. I'm not. My creative outlet turns out to be business. I grew up in a business-minded family. My father was kind of a peddler of all things and a professional gambler. And so I kind of got that gene, and business to me was second nature, but I wasn't highly motivated by buying low and selling high. And it wasn't until I met my first mentor, Bill Campbell, who is really a leading light in Silicon Valley. People in this room probably don't know much about him. He was Steve Jobs' mentor, Larry and Sergey's mentor at Google. He was Jeff Bezos' mentor. An amazing man. He was a football coach. But he took us all under his wings at some point in our careers, and I was a lifelong buddy of his because he and I did several companies together. But what I got from him was a sense that business was not about buying low and selling high. It was about people and value creation. And suddenly it became interesting, right? Because it wasn't about money. Money was the first derivative. Money was simply the fuel that I had to continue to do what I was doing. It was not about consumption, it was about creation. And that felt interesting to me. And so that's why I went down that path. Which brings me to the virtual CEO job, which was I was beginning to think, how could I live the creative life in business? As I moved up and up the ranks in running companies, I was getting further and further away from the creative side of business. I was dealing with HR issues all day long, right? I was dealing with the press all day long. I wasn't dealing with stimulating talent to come up with new and interesting approaches to solving problems. So I basically went out into the world and said, look, I'm willing to partner with any founder out there with little or no experience and give them all of my experience, all of my network, in return for some small piece of the company to work side by side with them to help build their businesses. The first one I did was a company called Web TV. which in 24 months was sold to Microsoft for about $500 million. And so with that being said, I had a whole bunch of venture capitalists coming to me going, you know what you do? Could you do that for us? The next one I did was TiVo, which we took public after 36 months for $4.5 billion. And so I started in this process of being able to team well with talent. And it's interesting, in retrospect, is I realized that's what I'd always done. When I was a rock promoter, I was dealing with talent. And when I was sort of pushing myself up through the ranks of business, I was always working with the creative talent. And so that became my role in the Valley, was developing talent in the context of developing their business. In the virtual CEO role, there were certain rules I learned over time. So for instance, I never took a board seat, but I sat at the board and I mouthed off like crazy. But I never took a board seat because I never wanted to be the entrepreneur's boss. I was their uncle. I wasn't their boss. I was the person that they had to listen to, and the person they couldn't lie to in the room. And so that was a really important role in helping to develop them. The other thing I learned to do is I never invested directly in the company. I only invested in the institutional investors who were investing in the company. So I ended up being an investor in a dozen venture capital firms, but not directly in the company, because it was really important for me to be aligned with management, not with the investors. And the investors knew that. I also would work hands-on in the organization and make myself available not just to the CEO, but to his team or her team. Now that's interesting as well, because that requires a tremendous amount of trust. Because if I break that trust and I undermine that founder, everything falls apart. So I sort of developed these rules over time, and they worked quite well. I did that for a while, and then I wrote a book called The Monk and the Riddle, which probably would have never got read except for the fact that it was published the day of the tech crash in 2000. And it was all about why the tech crash was about to happen. I started writing it in 1997 based upon the notion that I felt like entrepreneurs had lost their way, and we were on borrowed time, and it was about to end. And my timing was lucky, and the book was popular, and I moved from there to teaching at Stanford for about 9 years, doing only social ventures for a while, and then being invited to Kleiner Perkins to be an investor, but bringing my model of hands-on development of talent and companies in the process.